I'm Bubble. I know my username says Bubble of, but you can just call me Bubble. I'm also known as Ali Wurds. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, and I have worked with and written about the system in Prometheus Rising for about 5 years now, among other things. So this is our first session, and if you do miss it or miss part of it, whatever, it's going to end up on our YouTube channel. So be mindful that this is being recorded. We're going to skip the preface for now, but it's pretty good if you want to read it. And we're going to start with the warning that on my PDF is on page 22. It says, "Warning. Wilson describes himself as a guerrilla ontologist, signifying his intent to attack language and knowledge the way terrorists attack their targets, to jump out from the shadows for an unprovoked attack, and then slink back and hide behind a hearty belly laugh." Alright, so chapter 1 is called The Thinker and the Prover. Starts out with a quote from Buddha saying, "All that we are is the result of all that we have thought. It is founded on thought, it is based on thought." And if you want to get a PDF of the book, I highly recommend it. There are free versions of it all over. There are a lot of diagrams and images that, for the time being, I'm going to skip over unless they're especially relevant, but there are a lot of details and double image type things built in. Alright, so starting off with chapter 1. William James, father of American psychology, tells of meeting an old lady who told him the earth rested on the back of a huge turtle. "But, my dear lady," Professor James asked as politely as possible, "what holds up the turtle?" "Ah," she said, "that's easy. He is standing on the back of another turtle." "Oh, I see," said Professor James, still being polite. "But would you be so good as to tell me what holds up the second turtle?" "It's no use, Professor," said the old lady, realizing he was trying to lead her into a logical trap. "It's turtles, turtles, turtles all the way." Don't be too quick to laugh at this little old lady. All human minds work on fundamentally similar principles. Her universe was a little bit weirder than most, but it was built upon the same mental principles as every other universe people have believed in. As Dr. Leonard Orr has noted, the human mind behaves as if it were divided into two parts, the thinker and the prover. The thinker can think about virtually anything. History shows that it can think the Earth is suspended on the backs of infinite turtles, or that the Earth is hollow, or that the Earth is floating in space. Millions of people believe that, including the present author. Comparative religion and philosophy show that the thinker can regard itself as mortal, as immortal, as both mortal and immortal, the reincarnation model, or even as non-existent, Buddhism. It can think itself into living in a Christian universe, a Marxist universe, a scientific relativistic universe, or a Nazi universe, among many possibilities. As psychiatrists and psychologists have often observed, much to the chagrin of their medical colleagues, the thinker can think itself sick, and it can even think itself well again. The prover is a much simpler mechanism. It operates on one law only. Whatever the thinker thinks, the prover proves. To cite a notorious example which unleashed incredible horrors earlier in this century, if the thinker thinks that all Jews are rich, the prover will prove it. It will find evidence that the poorest Jew in the most rundown ghetto has hidden money somewhere. Similarly, feminists are able to believe that all men, including the starving wretches who live and sleep on the streets, are exploiting all women, including the Queen of England. If the thinker thinks that the sun moves around the earth, the prover will obligingly organize all perceptions to fit that thought. If the thinker changes its mind and decides the earth moves around the sun, the prover will reorganize the evidence. If the thinker thinks holy water from Lourdes will cure its lumbago, the prover will skillfully orchestrate all signals from the glands, muscles, organs, etc., until they have organized themselves into good health again. Of course, it is fairly easy to see that other people's minds operate this way. It is comparatively much harder to become aware that one's own mind is working that way also. It is believed, for instance, that some men are more objective than others. One seldom hears this about women. Businessmen are allegedly hard-nosed, pragmatic, and objective in this sense. A brief examination of the dingbat politics most businessmen endorse will quickly correct that impression. Scientists, however, are still believed to be objective. No study of the lives of the great scientists will confirm this. They were as passionate, and hence as prejudiced, as any assembly of great painters or great musicians. It was not just the Church, but also the established astronomers of the time who condemned Galileo, and that the majority of physicists rejected Einstein's special relativity theory in 1905. Einstein himself would not accept anything in quantum theory after 1920, no matter how many experiments supported it. Edison's commitment to direct current DC electrical generators led him to insist alternating current AC generators were unsafe for years after their safety had been proven to everyone else. All right, that's really a lot of content, even though it was just 2 pages. How are we all feeling right now? Any questions or comments, or should we just keep going?
Is this sort of laying down the foundation at the moment? Like, basically saying there's 2 types of thinkers or 2 types of people that come to information, or it feels like this is where it's going.
That is a very good question. It doesn't quite say that, although some people might be inclined to lean one way or the other. It's saying that inside of every single person, you have both a part of your consciousness that does thinking, thinks about things, and then there's a separate part of your consciousness, maybe it overlaps, that proves the things that you think. And it's relating that to like the placebo effect. So like if you think holy water from a certain river is going to heal you, you very well may end up alleviating some of your symptoms. And it's also showing, just like in conspiracy theories, like in Hollow Earth theory, if you keep thinking about something long enough, you will eventually start coming up with reasons to prove it to yourself. But it's not just like some people are, yeah.
It's sort of like the left half of the brain and the right half of the brain, isn't it? Like, well, I heard that one works differently than the
other. That is a common way people like to talk about it, but it's like left brain and right brain is like a useful metaphor for different kinds of consciousness, I would say, or different thinking styles. But it's not scientifically accurate that like your left side of the brain is logical or whatever.
All right.
But I think he does use left and right brain metaphors throughout the book. All right, so let's get back to the PDF. All right, so science achieves or approximates objectivity not because the individual scientist is immune from psychological laws that govern the rest of us, but because the scientific method, a group creation, eventually overrides individual prejudices in the long run. To take a notorious example from the 1960s, there was a point when 3 research groups had proven, and the proven is in quotes, that LSD causes chromosome damage, while 3 other groups had proven that LSD had no effect on the chromosomes. In each case, the prover had proved what the thinker thought. Right now, there are in physics 7 experiments that confirm a very controversial concept known as Bell's theorem, and 2 experiments that refute Bell's theorem. In the area of extrasensory perception, the results are uniform after more than a century. Everybody who sets out to prove the ESP exists succeeds. And everybody who sets out to prove that ESP does not exist also succeeds. Truth, in quotes, or relative truth, emerges only after decades of experiments by thousands of groups all over the world. In the long run, we are hopefully approximating closer and closer to objective truth over the centuries. In the short run, Orr's law always holds. Whatever the thinker thinks, the prover will prove. And then there's a little footnote that says, if the reader is a scientist, be not alarmed. This refers not to you, but only to those benighted fools in the opposite camp who refuse to recognize that your theory is the only reasonable one, of course. Back to the main text. And if the thinker thinks passionately enough, the prover will prove the thought so conclusively that you will never talk a person out of such a belief, even if it is something as remarkable as the notion that there is a gaseous vertebrate of astronomical heft, God, who will spend all eternity torturing people who do not believe in his religion. All right, that is the end of the first chapter, except for the exercises. Would anyone like to jump in and either ask something or make a comment? Are you raising your hand back there? Black Widow?
I have a question. Do you think that humanity is doomed to believe in a god? Because I've been reading a lot and I've seen that even people that aren't taught religion make up something bigger and stronger than them, if you know what I mean. So are we like programmed to literally believe in a god? even though
That's
it
a-
may be real or not?
That's a very interesting question. I think it depends a lot on how you define your terms. So when you say, it depends on what you mean by God. It depends on what you mean by humanity as a whole. Like, there are definitely some people who are atheists. And it also depends on what you mean by people being programmed to believe in a God. I think Robert Anton Wilson would be inclined to say that culture has programmed people to believe in God or gods. And that the kind of God or gods people believe depends on the cultural programming they've received. And that's a major theme of this book, is what is your programming? There's actually a meta-programming circuit that we'll get to in a later chapter, all about reprogramming yourself. So no, I don't think humanity is doomed to believe in a God, regardless of what that means. I don't think humanity is doomed to believe in anything in particular, but that the cultures that have currently gained power perhaps doom individuals to particular kinds of programming, unless they go through the effort of reprogramming themselves.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's a very good question. So let's take a look at the exercises. So if you want to get the most out of this book, you don't necessarily have to do every single exercise, but it is helpful to at least think about them and maybe pick 1 or 2 exercises from each section to do. A lot of them are very easy. Some of them can be significantly harder. And what they really do is they help you put into practice the ideas that are in each chapter, so that you can really cement the ideas that are there into your long-term memory and see how they change your way of being in the world. All right, so it says exercises. Sad as it is to say, you never understand anything by merely reading a book about it. That's why every science course includes laboratory experiments, and why every consciousness liberation movement demands practice of yogas, meditations, and confrontation techniques, in which the ideas are tested in the laboratory of your own nervous system. The reader will absolutely not understand this book unless he or she does the exercises given at the end of each chapter. To explore the thinker and the prover, try the following. 1 says, visualize a quarter vividly and imagine vividly that you are going to find the quarter on the street. Then, look for the quarter every time you take a walk. Meanwhile, continuing to visualize it. See how long it takes for you to find the quarter. Number 2 says, explain the experiment above by the hypothesis of selective attention. That is, believe that there are lots of lost quarters everywhere, and you are bound to find one by continually looking. Go looking for a second quarter. 3. Explain the experiment by the alternative mystical hypothesis that mind controls everything. Believe that you made the quarter manifest in this universe. Go looking for a second quarter. 4. Compare the time it takes to find the second quarter using the first hypothesis, attention, with the time it takes using the second hypothesis, mind over matter. 5. With your own ingenuity, invent similar experiments and each time compare the 2 theories, selective attention, coincidence, versus mind controls everything, psychokinesis. 6. Avoid coming to any strong conclusions prematurely. At the end of a month, reread this chapter, think it over again, and still postpone coming to any dogmatic conclusion. Believe it possible that you do not know everything yet, and that you might have something still to learn. 7. Convince yourself, if you are not already convinced, that you are ugly, unattractive, and dull. Go to a party in that frame of mind. Observe how people treat you. 8. Convince yourself, if you are not already convinced, that you are handsome, irresistible, and witty. Go to a party in that frame of mind. Observe how people treat you. 9. This is the hardest of all exercises and comes in 2 parts. First, observe closely and dispassionately 2 dear friends and 2 relative strangers. Try to figure out what their thinkers think and how their provers methodically set out about approving it. Second, apply the same exercise to yourself. If you think you have learned the lessons of these exercises in less than 6 months, you haven't really been working at them. With real work, in 6 months, you should be just beginning to realize how little you know about everything. 10. Believe it possible that you can float off the ground and fly by merely willing it. See what happens. If this exercise proves as disappointing to you as it has to me, try number 11, which has never been disappointing. 11. Believe that you can exceed all your previous ambitions and hopes in all areas of your life. All right, that is the end of the first section. Any thoughts or comments, questions on those exercises?
That first part about the quarter, where you consciously look for it, I've sort of done something like that already, but without knowing. So where I live, there's someone who lives in my town who I see, downtown a lot. So I actually have a list on my phone of how many times I've seen him because he just walks past that many times. And me and my friend actually done a test. We said, right, we just said to each other, right, we bet we're gonna see him today. And we walked past that day 3 times because we were, actively looking for him. But then there'll be days where we don't even think about it, and then we see him, and then I check the notes, and it's been like a month or 2 since we last saw him. So I don't know. It got to the point where we're taking notes of how many times we saw him because he was walking past us that much. So I don't know. I just feel like that was something similar to what he was saying with the quarter experiment.
Yeah, there are definitely some similarities there. Like, I really think that Raw is getting at different ideas about like manifestation, like where you want something badly enough, or you will it strongly enough that you manifest it, and thinking about that really does seem to work sometimes, at least for me and some other people. So what are some different explanations for it? How can you avoid getting trapped in a single explanation for various phenomena in your life? It's cool.
There was also a part in that where he said, try going to a party with one mindset versus another. I don't know who said it, but I heard this quote, like, perception is reality, but I feel like that sort of falls under that as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong relation between those two things. It really depends on what you mean by reality, but yeah. All right. Are you raising your hand, Black Widow? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Do you really believe people have the ability to manifest things if they do it long enough?
That's a complicated question. I don't believe that you can manifest anything under any conditions, but I do believe that in the right circumstances, you can produce a phenomenon that is indistinguishable from your own perspective of you manifesting something. And there's not really a way to prove or disprove it. You can come up with endless reasons to prove or disprove it either direction, like he talks about with people setting out to prove or disprove ESP. And it's really, you'll find throughout this book that Robert Anton Wilson is more of a pragmatist, in that he would suggest that you should believe the things that provide the most value to you. So does it provide more value to you? That's actually part of the experiment for the first 3 exercises is, does it provide more value to you to believe in one model of reality versus another? If you believe that it's just you looking for something and being more likely to observe it, what does that do for you versus you believing that maybe you are manifesting it? And you can choose to believe something without thinking that it's actually real. Like, you can convince yourself of sort of a conditional belief. Like, you know that you're choosing to believe it. Maybe it's not literally real, but you know that by believing in the shorthand, it might provide you with benefits. All right. Chapter 2 is called Hardware and Software, the Brain and Its Programs. It starts out with a quote that says, "We as a species exist in a world in which exist a myriad of data points. In our terminology, these data points are events or actions, i.e. verbs, not nouns. Upon the matrices of points, we superimpose a structure, in our terminology, models or maps, static things, nouns, not verbs. So structures are nouns, and data points are verbs. All right, upon these matrices of points, we superimpose a structure, and the world makes sense to us. The pattern of the structure originates within our biological and sociological properties." 3. In our terminology, brain hardware and software. So he's saying that data points are like verbs, And then we take those verbs and we explain them with a structure, which is like a noun. We categorize phenomenon into nouns. We turn them into things. And then 3, the pattern of the structure that we created to explain phenomenon becomes like a model. It becomes our brain hardware and software. All right. So, first page of the chapter. We will, throughout this book, consider the human brain a kind of biocomputer, an electrocolloidal computer as distinct from the electronic or solid-state computers which exist outside our heads. Please note carefully and long remember that we have not said that the human brain is a computer. The Aristotelian idea that to understand something you must know what it is has been abandoned in one science after another for the pragmatic reason that the simple word is introduces so many metaphysical assumptions that we can argue forever about them. In most advanced sciences, such as mathematical physics, nobody talks about what anything is anymore. They talk about what model or map can be best used to understand whatever we are investigating. In general, this scientific habit of avoiding is can be profitably extended to all areas of thought. Thus, when you read anywhere that A is B, it will clarify matters if you translate this as A can be considered as or modeled by B. When we say A is B, we are saying that A is only what it appears within our field of study, our area of specialization. That is saying too much. When we say A can be considered as B or modeled by B, we are saying exactly as much as we have a right to say and no more. We therefore say that the brain can be considered as a computer, but we do not say that it is a computer. The brain considers to be made up of matter in electrocolloidal suspension, protoplasm. Colloids are pulled together toward a condition of gel by their surface tensions. This is because surface tensions pull all glue-like substances together. Colloids are also conversely pushed apart toward a condition of soul by their electrical charges. This is because their electrical charges are similar, and similar electrical charges always repel each other. In the equilibrium between gel and soul, the colloidal suspension maintains its continuity and life continues. Move the suspension too far toward gel or too far toward soul, and life ends. Any chemical that gets into the brain changes the gel-soul balance, and consciousness is accordingly influenced. Thus, potatoes are, like LSD, psychedelic in a milder way. The changes in consciousness when one moves from a vegetarian diet to an omnivorous diet, or vice versa, are also psychedelic. Since what the thinker thinks, the prover proves, all of our ideas are psychedelic. Even without experimenting with diet or drugs, whatever you think you should see, you will see, unless it is physically impossible in this universe. Alright, there's a little diagram here that's helpful for me to describe. So at the center of a figure it says programs running, and then connected to it are the words pleasure, pain, approach, flee. So pleasure and pain are labeled as inputs, and approach and flee are labeled as output, meaning you have programs running in your brain, they take the inputs of pleasure and pain, and then on some level you decide to either approach or flee whatever stimulus is causing the pleasure and pain. All experience is a muddle until we make a model to explain it. The model can clarify the muddles, but the model is never the muddle itself. The map is not the territory. The menu does not taste like the meal. Every computer consists of two aspects known as hardware and software. Software here includes information. The hardware in a solid-state computer is concrete and localized, consisting of central processing unit, display, keyboard, external disk drive, CD-ROM, floppies, etc., all the parts you can drag into Radio Shack for repair if the computer is malfunctioning. The software consists of programs that can exist in many forms, including the totally abstract. A program can be in the computer in the sense that it is recorded in the CPU or on a disk, which is hitched up to the computer. A program can also exist on a piece of paper. if I invented it myself, or in a manual if it is a standard program. In these cases, it is not in the computer, but can be put in at any time. But a program can be even more tenuous than that. It can exist only in my head if I have never written it down, or if I have used it once and erased it. The hardware is more real, in quotes, than the software, in that you can always locate it in space-time. If it's not in the bedroom, somebody must have moved it to the study, etc. On the other hand, the software is more real in the sense that you can smash the hardware back to dust, kill the computer, and the software still exists and can materialize or manifest again in a different computer. Any speculations about reincarnation at this point are the responsibility of the reader, not the author. In speaking of the human brain as an electrocolloidal biocomputer, we all know where the hardware is. It is inside the human skull. The software, however, seems to be anywhere and everywhere. For instance, the software in my brain also exists outside my brain in such forms as, say, a book I read 20 years ago, which was an English translation of various signals transmitted by Plato 2,400 years ago. Other parts of my software are made up of the software of Confucius, James Joyce, my second grade teacher, the Three Stooges, Beethoven, my mother and father, Richard Nixon, my various dogs and cats, Dr. Carl Sagan, and anybody and to some extent anything that has ever impacted my brain. This may sound strange, but that's the way software or information functions. Of course, if consciousness consisted of nothing but this undifferentiated tapioca of timeless, spaceless software, we would have no individuality, no center, no self. We want to know, then, how out of this universal software ocean a specific person emerges. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Because the human brain, like other animal brains, acts as an electrocolloidal computer, not a solid-state computer. It follows the same laws as other animal brains. That is, the programs get into the brain as electrochemical bonds in discrete quantum stages. Each set of programs consists of 4 basic parts. 1. Genetic imperatives, totally hardwired programs or instincts. 2. Imprints. These are more or less hardwired programs which the brain is genetically designed to accept only at certain points in its development. These points are known in ethology as times of imprint vulnerability. 3. Conditioning. These are programs built into the imprints. These are programs built onto the imprints. They are looser and fairly easy to change with counter conditioning. 4. Learning. This is even looser and softer than conditioning. So we have genetic imperatives, imprints, conditioning, learning. In general, the primordial imprint can always overrule any subsequent conditioning or learning. An imprint is a species of software that has become built-in hardware, being impressed on the tender neurons when they are particularly open and vulnerable. Imprints, software frozen into hardware, are the non-negotiable aspects of our individuality. Out of the infinity of possible programs existing as potential software, the imprint establishes the limits, perimeters, within which all subsequent conditioning and learning occurs. Alright, I'm going to describe this picture here for a second, and then we'll stop for questions. It says, your hardware is localized. Brain cells right here, right now. Your software is non-local. Point events everywhere, everywhen. And then there's a picture of someone with hardware written on their head, and on their body it says, living in a world filled with software. And around them are symbols representing all sorts of different things, like there's a cross, E equals MC squared, dogma, Star of David, a television, people talking. And let's pause there for a second. How's everyone doing?
My brain hurt. I have a question. Like, all of that, like, it makes you think, where are thoughts stored? Like, do they have a location? Or, I don't know, just have like so many questions after that.
Yeah, the answer to that question, that depends on what you mean by a thought, and then of course what model you use to explain it. So based on how this chapter describes things, you could say that your thoughts are phenomenon, they're experiences. And then you can come up with a variety of models to reify those phenomena into a structure, into some sort of pattern of things, nouns. Robert Anton Wilson would suggest that everything is really just verbs, but you can explain it in the matter of things. So if you believe in like a scientific model, your thoughts are located in your brain and there are specific patterns of neurochemicals moving around. But you could also think of it in terms of like Plato's theory of forms, or maybe there's an astral realm, or maybe there are little green men on Mars who are writing software that runs your brain in the Matrix, or you could explain it all sorts of ways.
No, I don't know. Just so many questions to do with the brain. It's just when I think about it, I just get a sore head, so I just usually back away from it.
All right. We got a little bit of time left. Let's go ahead and try to finish the chapter. All right, so after that image where it says your hardware is localized and your software is non-local, it says, before the first imprint, the consciousness of the infant is formless and void, like the universe at the beginning of Genesis, or the descriptions of unconditioned, enlightened, i.e. exploded, consciousness in mystic traditions. As soon as the first imprint is made, structure emerges out of the creative void. The growing mind, alas, becomes trapped within the structure. It identifies the structure in a sense. It becomes the structure. The growing mind becomes the structure. The entire process is analyzed in G. Spencer Brown's Laws of Form. And Brown was writing about the foundations of mathematics and logic. But every sensitive reader knows that Brown is also talking about a process we have all passed through in creating, out of an infinite ocean of signals, those particular constructs which we call myself and my world. Not surprisingly, many acids have said that Brown's math is the best description ever written of an LSD trip. Each successive imprint complicates the software which programs our experience and which we experience as reality. Conditioning and learning build further networks onto this bedrock of imprinted software. The total structure of this brain circuitry makes up our map of the world. It is what our thinker thinks, and our prover mechanically fits all incoming signals to the limitations of this map. Following Dr. Timothy Leary, with a few modifications, we shall divide this brain hardware into 8 circuits for convenience. For convenience means that this is the best map I know at present. I assume it will be replaced by a better map within 10 or 15 years, and in any case, the map is not the territory. 4 of the circuits are antique and conservative. They exist in everybody except feral children. The first circuit, the oral biosurvival circuit. This is imprinted by the mother of the first mothering object. This is imprinted by the mother or the first mothering object and conditioned by subsequent nourishment or threat. It is primarily concerned with sucking, feeding, cuddling, and body treats mechanically from the noxious or predatory, or from anything associated with the noxious or predatory. 2. The anal emotional territorial circuit. This is imprinted in the toddling stage when the infant rises up, walks about, and begins to struggle for power within the family structure. This mostly mammalian circuit processes territorial rules, emotional games or cons, pecking order, and rituals of domination or submission. 3. The time-binding semantic circuit. This is imprinted and conditioned by human artifacts and symbol systems. It handles and packages the environment, classifying everything according to the local reality tunnel. Invention, calculation, prediction, and transmitting signals across generations are its functions. 4. The moral socio-sexual circuit. This is imprinted by the first orgasm mating experiences at puberty and is conditioned by tribal taboos. It processes sexual pleasure, local definitions of right and wrong, reproduction, adult parental personality, that's the sex role, and nurture of the young. The development of these circuits as the brain evolved through evolution, and as each domesticated primate brain recapitulates evolution in growing from infancy to adulthood, makes possible gene pool survival, mammalian sociobiology, pecking order or politics, and transmission of culture. The second group of 4 brain circuits is much newer, and each circuit exists at present only in minorities. Where the antique circuits recapitulate evolution to the present, these futuristic circuits precapitulate our future evolution. 5. The holistic neurosomatic circuit. This is imprinted by ecstatic experience via biological or chemical yogas. It processes neurosomatic mind-body feedback loops, somatic sensory bliss, feeling high, faith healing, etc. Christian Science, NLP, and holistic medicine consist of tricks or gimmicks to get this circuit into action, at least temporarily. Tantra Yoga is concerned with shifting consciousness entirely into the circuit. 6. The collective neurogenetic circuit. This is imprinted by advanced yogas, biochemical electrical stresses. It processes DNA, RNA brain feedback systems, and is collective in that it contains and has access to the whole evolutionary script, past and future. Experience of this circuit is numinous, mystical, mind-shattering. Here dwell the archetypes of Jung's collective unconsciousness, gods, goddesses, demons, hairy dwarfs, and other personifications of the DNA programs, instincts that govern us. 7. The meta-programming circuit. This is imprinted by very advanced yogas. It consists in modern terms of cybernetic consciousness, reprogramming and re-imprinting all other circuits, even reprogramming itself, making possible conscious choice between alternative universes or reality tunnels. 8. The non-local quantum circuit. This is imprinted by shock or by near-death experiences or clinical death, by out-of-body experiences, by trans-time perceptions, precognition, by trans-space visions, ESP, etc. It tunes the brain into the non-local quantum communication system suggested by physicists such as Bohm, Walker, Sarfati, Bell, etc. These circuits will be explained in detail as we proceed. All right, let's pause there for a second because that's a lot of new content, and then after that it's just some more exercises. We have about 10 minutes left if we're going to make this an hour. All right, any questions or comments?
Yeah, maybe Bubble, since you're so familiar with this stuff, you could do just in your own words one more time the short version of the 8 circuits, if you have that kind of stuff ready. You know, to somebody who's totally new to hearing this, right? How would you simplify Ra's language here a little more, if you could?
Yeah, let me go back into the list to make sure I don't skip anything. All right, so there are 2 groups of 4 circuits. And I have some theories about that maybe we'll get to after we've gone through the whole book, but there are 2 groups of 4 circuits. Let me scroll back. I scrolled too far. All right, so the first one is the oral biosurvival circuit. This is like the first things that happens to an infant. It's like your first imprints. A lot of it has to do with that diagram you saw earlier where you're moving towards something or you're moving away from something. Do you like feeding and cuddling? The first things an infant does is it looks for food and comfort, and it tries to get away or cry at anything that makes it feel bad. So it's like pain and pleasure on a very basic level. The next stage, you'll see that they're using the words oral and anal. This is a reference to Freudian psychology. This one is more about like territory. It has to do with like what's yours and what's other people, power structures. So like after you learn how to eat and like just be alive, stay away from pain, you start to learn about your place in the world. What's yours, what belongs to other people. Then the next one is the time-binding semantic circuit. That's about like information. That's like when you start learning language and writing. Fourth is the moral sociosexual circuit. This is when, so you're still a very young child, but you start learning ideas of right and wrong. And a lot of that has to do with social structures and sexual taboos can be a big thing. Robert Anton Wilson is very influenced by Freudian psychology. So that's the first 4. Then if you go over to the second 4, Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary both believe that these are the kinds of consciousness that humanity will be developing. I don't know if they gave an exact timeline, but they were imagining that this is what people would be developing in the future. The 5th circuit is the holistic neurosomatic circuit. So this one is more about like ecstasy and love. He associated this circuit with like yoga and hippies and that kind of thing. It's not about like right and wrong. It's not about just like the pure oral pleasure of being a child. It's about love and connection and just feeling good in general. It takes you out of the physical experience. That's the big thing for the next four, is it takes you out of physicality. The sixth circuit is the collective neurogenetic circuit. So Robert Anton Wilson and other people that write on similar topics, some of them have this idea that your DNA has like a lot of ancestor DNA in it, and it contains a lot of information that you can access. And maybe that's where past lives come from, supposedly. I don't have strong feelings about that. So it's about like accessing the kind of consciousness that has to do with your whole evolutionary spectrum. So like if you have some sort of mystical experience where you see like all of life coming from like the first inception in some pool of sludge at the beginning of time up to where humanity is now in the future, and you can feel your mind moving through all life that has ever existed, that kind of experience is the neurogenetic circuit. After that, there's the metaprogramming circuit. Some people actually switch these two in terms of order, but this one is more about not just being aware of yourself, but being aware of the way you are aware. It's in the seventh circuit, the metaprogramming circuit, that you learn how to program and reprogram your biocomputer. So like you'll find that a lot of different occult practices use the fifth circuit. They induce a state of ecstasy or maybe gnosis or some other term that they use to get you to jump out of yourself for a minute and reprogram yourself. So a lot of stuff that people call high magic is that metaprogramming circuit. And then the eighth circuit is the non-local quantum circuit. This one is not only like being out of yourself and being out of physicality, but it's almost like no mind. It's sort of like you're out of your body and you're out of your mind. You're in something else. He talks about a variety of ways to induce those experiences. A lot of them are not necessarily safe. But yeah, it's like he associates it with quantum mechanics, among other things. So that's kind of a rundown, but really you're not going to understand them so well until you've read the chapter on each one. And then for me, I really felt like I had to read the book a second time before I was able to like piece it together. All right, I would just like to thank all of you again for coming to read this book with me. It's a wonderful book. A recording will be up on YouTube at some point in the coming days after we edit it down. And please join us again next week at the same day and time. If you're interested in some of the things that I do outside of vrchat, I have a link tree, and that is at linktr.ee/elephant-words, like big words, elephant words. So it's linktree/elephant-words. And if you haven't already, please do join the VRM Discord. We have a URL in the lobby. And consider supporting VRM by donating, supporting on Patreon, or becoming a volunteer. We do have more information at vrmystery.school/support. And that is the end of today's session, but feel free to mingle in the lounge. And some of us will be heading over there in just a minute.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bob.